I'm pleased to have two industry experts with us today. Julie McGill, Vice President of Supply Chain and Strategy Insights for Food Logic, and Dawn Durham, Vice President of Customer Solutions for PLM. Welcome, panelists. And Julie, I'll let you get things started with the agenda for today's session.
All right. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Mary Lou and the AIM team for hosting this webinar series. You know, I think it's so very important for companies, you know, to not only get information, get educated on FSMA 204, but to also share learnings. And I think today's agenda is going to do just that. So I'm excited to have Dawn with us today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start by doing an overview of FSMA 204, talk about just super high level, an overview of the rule, because we've got some folks on the call who might not be familiar with this pending regulation. Then we're going to have just an open discussion about the key strategies and things that companies should be thinking about and things that we've learned. You know, Dawn and I work with a lot of different companies. And so in AIM as a whole, we're having these discussions about FSMA 204 and what companies can do ahead of the final rule, right? We're waiting on some things like attributes and critical tracking events and the different things we're going to need to do. But what things can companies do right now ahead of that just to prepare and take a look at systems and processes, things like that. And then finally, we'll do a real quick timeline review and talk about what's next. So with that, right at the top, we are less than 2 weeks away from the publication date. So by November 7th, we will have the final rule for FSMA 204. And this rule is all about enhanced traceability record keeping. So today, as part of the Food Safety Modernization Act, there's quite a bit of information that companies have to collect regarding products that are moving through their supply chains. In FSMA 204, which this section is all about enhanced traceability record keeping for high-risk foods, this is going to go beyond what we do today. The next piece is that this rule mandates the linking of incoming and outgoing products. So taking a look at things like the lot code and product identifiers and other information to help the FDA move more swiftly as they are going through an investigation. So like I said, this is focused on lot level traceability. And the other piece is that there's a whole component of this that is about data collection, data storage, and there is some data sharing involved as well. So companies are going to have to collect and store data for 24 months for the activities or the events that they own in the supply chain. And then if the FDA requests that data, they ask that you provide that data in a sortable spreadsheet within 24 hours. On the right here, I've got a picture of one of the documents that's on the FDA website. They did an excellent job of creating materials. They've got a lot of content on their website. This is a picture of their at a glance, which is just a very high level overview of the proposed rule. So what is that food traceability list? When I talk about those high-risk foods, the FDA created a risk ranking model, and they took a look at various categories. And so depending on the product, the number of outbreaks, illnesses, et cetera, they created this list, which you see on the right. And the list, some of the things on this list are things that we've commonly seen. We know leafy greens have had some issues over the past couple of years, melons, peppers, but we have things like peanut butter, right? Peanut butter has had some issues recently and over the past couple of years. And so nut butters are on that list. But there's also things like cheeses, and these are other than hard cheeses. It's a lot of the soft cheeses. Shell eggs are on that list as well. A whole host of produce items, including fresh herbs. But there's also fresh cut fruits and vegetables. So regardless of what the item is, if it's fresh cut, falls on the list. And also ready to eat deli salads. And so there's quite a few items, you know, we think about potato salads and pasta salads, coleslaw and things like that. And finally, seafood. There's a host of seafood items, finfish, crustaceans, mollusks, etc. The way that the list is has been put together, we have the current list, and that very well could change in the final rule. We'll see. But the piece to remember is that if there are changes to this list, and the FDA has been very clear that there will be additions. And if something gets added to the list, you must be ready to do record keeping within 12 months of that addition to the list. If things are removed, you can stop that additional record keeping immediately. And this is going to be very important to companies when we talk about things like LTO items or new product introductions. If it is on the food traceability list or contains an ingredient and qualifies for the FTL, then you're going to want to make sure that that's part of your vetting process and onboarding process with items that are on the FTL. You're going to have to keep that in mind. The other thing is that this rule really applies to the whole chain. It applies to folks who grow or manufacture products, if you process, pack, or hold foods. So this does include food service operators, grocery retailers, etc. They have this whole, they have a term that they call retail establishments. And so this is really that point of sale, right, to the consumer. Those parties are also part of this rule. So when we talk about the data and the events or the activities in the supply chain where we are going to be required to collect that additional data, these are called key data elements, right? What's that data set that we need to capture? And then critical tracking events are the activities or the events that are happening in the supply chain. And I was very pleased when this proposed rule was published that the FDA took a harmonized approach. They took a broad look at all the work that the food industry has done over the past 20 plus years and looked at things like the Produce Traceability Initiative, Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability, the Grocery and Food Service Initiatives at GS1 US. They took a look at that work and said, okay, here's the standards that are in use. Here's the approach that they're taking using consensus-based standards. And they took a similar approach, and we saw a lot of that language in the proposed rule, and I anticipate we'll see that in the final rule. So things like key data elements and critical tracking events, right? That's terminology that's used at IFT, at AIM, at GS1, et cetera, when we're talking about events and data. And we saw that throughout the rule as well, right? And so when they talk about the data that needs to be captured, there's a couple data keys that I want to make sure I point out. Things like product identifiers. We need unique product identification that's perpetuated across the supply chain. Location identification, again, making sure that we have unique IDs and that we have the correct information, whether it's growing coordinates for things like a farm, or it's addresses, et cetera, for distribution centers, restaurants, et cetera. And then finally, the lot code. So the way that the rule is written, right, they're trying to do lot level tracking. And there's sections that speak very clearly about the fact that, these lot codes are assigned at a certain point during certain activities in the supply chain, and that those lot codes should not change. They should be perpetuated across the supply chain until another activity happens. For example, if I take whole head lettuce and I shred it, I'm transforming it into a new product. That's when you would assign a new lot code for that transformation event. So those, think about it as significant changes would then would bring on that new lot code to be assigned. The other thing that I want to point out here on the left-hand side of the slide here is another image from the FDA. And a very, very important thing here is to take a look at your roles and the different steps or the events that you're going to need to collect data within that role. You'll notice that the farm, that growing event and the shipping event, et cetera, there's a whole host of data that's been outlined that they'll need to collect. And then some of that data needs to be shared with the processor. And again, the processor has a whole host of records that they'll need to collect, including the receipt of product. If they transform it, like I said, whole head to shredded romaine would be a transformation event. And then once I have that new product, I'm going to ship that to the next party in the supply chain, so on and so forth. And then real quick, an example of proposed data attributes that are part of this. This is not the entire list, but I wanted to break it down so that you could understand that really the data set, a lot of this are things that you're already collecting today. trading partners across the supply chain. When we are doing business, we share things like product data. Give me the name, give me the product identifier. If it's produce, tell me the commodity code, et cetera. Tell me about the packaging size, right? Is it a 25-pound bag? Is it a 5-pound bag? Is it a case? Is it a pallet, et cetera? Location data, right? Who and what facilities are a part of these exchanges. And as part of this, they're asking for additional information. For some of this, some of the attributes, they are asking for company contact information, and we'll see what that looks like in the final rule. The next is that transactional data, so event data, right? Those critical tracking events that I talked about. This is when did it happen? What products were involved? The lot information, any reference records like BOL, PO numbers and things like that. And then we get into all the identifiers, point of contact, and they even want to know the name of the transporter when we're talking about shipping events. Then when we get over to some of these other events, shipping data, we could use things like an ASN and that first receiver data. This particular slide was part of some work that we did with GS1, where we said, hey, we're exchanging a lot of this data using GS1 standards today. Could we apply those standards to data collection and data capture for FSMA 204? And that's that bottom line there. Can we use things like the Global Data Synchronization Network? Can we use things like EPCIS, which is a standardized way to share traceability data, EDI, and other standards to collect and share this information? So now I'm going to have Don join me to talk through those key strategies. And like I said, we're going to have this be a discussion. So during the call, I know all the attendees' phones are muted. So if you have a question, please put that into the chat and we will address those questions at the end of the call. But certainly if we're in the middle of something and you're like, oh, I want to know more about that, please put that in the chat and then we will address those at the end of the call. So Don, thanks for turning your camera on. And so that first piece, and I was just touching on this, when we talk about understanding roles, sometimes companies have hidden roles in their supply chains, right? You think of somebody like a food service operator, well, they just need to collect data for their restaurants, but a lot of them have commissaries. Some operators now are opening distribution centers, and we're seeing that both on the grocery and the food service side. So do you want to talk about like some of those, the roles that you're seeing and some of the challenges there in understanding, kind of like, where do I sit?
Yeah, so Julie, I mean, really great question. And we're used to capturing data along the supply chain as we go through. There are some stakeholders that are not, those retail establishments like you're talking about with the restaurants. You look at some of the grocery, and we're talking about actual physical locations. So think about this. You're sitting at one of your favorite hamburger joints, chain account, and you look at that food traceability list. There's tomato on there, there's lettuce on there, and there's cheese. And think about that now the responsibility of the restaurant is to warehouse that data that you talked earlier about in the previous slide to come into that store and be able to be there in a repository for 2 years. So that tomato that you ate will have to be linked into that store for 2 years. And they've never had to do this before. So some of the comments that I've heard was like, oh, well, that's what my distributor is going to keep for me. Okay. And probably not. Okay. Is that the responsibility? And again, just so we're clear, these are the proposed rules that Julie and I are talking about right now.
Right.
What the final rules look like, we don't really know. Do we expect them to change very much? Probably not.
Right. Well, and you bring up a good point is, throughout the rule, it talks about here's the data that you need to capture, here's the data that you need to store, here's the data that you need to share. And they outline it by critical tracking event, not by party, because, you can have folks, almost everyone across the chain is doing a shipping event, many are doing a receiving event, et cetera. But, you bring up a good point is that there is a line in there that says retail establishments may utilize a third party, and they give an example of franchisees, and they say often data is collected at the corporate level and that, you know, they may have a common system that collects all the data for the other locations. And that's fine. But it also says in the very next sentence, if you engage a third party to collect that data for you, you are still the one that's responsible for providing the data to the FDA. So regardless of who that third party is, the request will come to you, and you, whoever you are, whether you're a restaurant, a grocer, maybe I'm a cafeteria, a hospital, whatever. If I'm the one getting asked for the data, it doesn't matter where it is, who collected it, et cetera. My company is responsible for providing that data. And I think that's key because if you are relying on a third party, making sure that you are ensuring, are they compliant? Are they collecting the data? Where is that data stored? How quickly can I get that data? And what agreements do we have in place for that collection and access of the data? Because like you said, don't assume. You need to have those conversations.
Yeah. So again, these are requirements you have to have. Sticking with that last mile, the traditional last mile, which is from the distributor to the retailer, which will be a restaurant or an individual grocery store. Product has a tendency of traveling down the supply chain on a pallet, and it's all shrink wrapped, and it travels from distribution center to distribution center until it gets there to last mile. So a company is probably, food store is probably going to want, 3 cases of beef, 2 cases of chicken, a case of lettuce, 3 cases of cheese, whatever that might be. So, but that has to be broken down. So although the rule does really talk about lot level traceability, you almost, if you've got one case on that pallet that has something on the food traceability list, you're really going to the case level at that point for that individual thing.
Right. And I think that brings us to that next, you need to review the FTL items. So on that food traceability list, it's real easy when it's whole head romaine. Romaine's on the list, that's easy. If it's a bell pepper, all peppers are on the list. When we get into ingredients, and when we get into things like a kill step or no kill step, that's where things get a little tough. And I have said this 100 times. This is a team effort. So the supplier knows, hey, this granola bar has peanut butter. This granola bar was baked. So there was a kill step. I have to track the use of the peanut butter, the making of the granola bar. But because I had a kill step, the other parties in the chain don't need to track that granola bar. I learned this at a conference recently. Chewy granola bars are not baked. So if I make a chewy granola bar and it has peanut butter, I not only have to track, who do I get the ingredient for that peanut butter and the lot and the transformation into the chewy granola bar, I also need to alert the next party in the supply chain, hey, this granola bar, it qualifies as an FTL item. You're going to need to do additional tracking. And so, as I said earlier, there is, for all shipping events in the proposed rule, it says that the shipper will tell the next subsequent party, hey, this is on the FTL. And here's the case quantities and the lot information, et cetera, so that you have the information you need to start your record keeping. And so companies need to think about not only how am I going to identify items on the FTL, what systems, what tools need to be updated, right? Because you probably have a product database, probably have a supplier management tool, et cetera. You're also going to want to think about, hey, when I see that flag, right, what processes need to get engaged, what things need to happen, et cetera, so that I can ensure that I'm collecting that data. Also, because it says, the shipper needs to tell me that this is on the FTL and send me that record, how am I going to get that? Am I going to get it on my ASN? Am I going to have them put it in a spreadsheet? Are they going to email it to me? Like, the FDA's left that open for you to decide how you're going to do that data exchange. But both the sender and the receiver need to figure out, okay, if I'm sending this data to thousands of companies every day, how am I going to collect it? How am I going to send it? And then the receivers are going to have to figure out, where do I put this data? What do I do with it? So any thoughts on that? Because certainly, like you said, there's managing data, and then there's managing pallet data, and then, like you said, that last mile for those cases. That's a lot of information for all these FTL items.
Yeah, and Julie, just so you know, there was a question earlier on the question to, what was the link to the FDA chart? I did put that in the,
good.
in the question and answer for everybody, so you can download that
Thank
yourself.
you.
So we do have that available to you. It's really good question about, the data part of it, because I mean, you and I were at a workshop just recently, and one of the distributors talked a little about the 20/80 rule, and he says, "Look, 80% of my people send me this information. I got a 20% that don't." And if I'm dealing with a customer of mine that wants something from a particular vendor because it's his brother-in-law or whatever it might be, they're shipping me that and they're saying, I don't supply that information. So that has to change.
Yeah.
And I really think that, the part of the pillars of the 204 rule, the new era of a smarter food safety, is where this is really coming from, is the food safety culture. And by you not obtaining that information, going back to your third party conversation, not getting that information shows you don't have a food safety culture, and they're looking on how they can measure that. So I think we all have to be very careful. If you continue to get the same lot number for the same product and thinking, this can't be right, because someone's something. Yeah.
Right. If you get a lot number, or if you get information that says, hey, this lot is from 1995, I think that item's already expired. Yeah.
Right. Well, here's when, Julie, moving on to the identity of FDA really talked about some additional roles, and this kind of goes into owners. Could you talk a little bit about a new one that they came up with? I mean, under the Sanitary Transportation Rule Act, they said that a shipper also included a broker, and a broker may never ever see a product. So they were under the guides of temperature requirements and all the things on that particular product.
Yeah.
And so there was actually a new role established within that, and they've identified that as an owner. And could you talk a little bit about that one? The first.
Yeah, because owners and roles kind of go together, right? Like, what are the things that we do, and then who's collecting that data today, who's sharing that data, but also what system does that sit in your organization? Who has access to those systems? Who has like admin rights, and who has view only rights? Because so much of this, there were roles that were identified. For example, one of the roles was traceability lot code generator. Who in the organization created that lot code? And the FDA wants to know, okay, it was Bob Smith, here's his phone number and his email, etc. None of us are sharing that information today, right? Like, that's not happening. Now, there was a lot of pushback from industry saying, hey, really that should be from for the organization, because Bob Smith might be retiring next month and he's not available, right? You're going to have bad information. So there were some data owners that you're like, this is interesting. There was also that idea of first receiver, and data owners for first receiver. There are exemptions for small farms, et cetera, that say, okay, here's the data that you'll need to collect. But if you are the farm and you're providing an FTL item to that first receiver, meaning the first company to take ownership. So that kind of, they clearly laid out, like, brokers often don't actually take physical possession. So they don't have to, even though they have a role in the, supply chain today, they're not a data owner for this FSMA data, right? And so this whole idea of first receiver, so it's the first receiver after the farm, and that could be produce, that could be seafood, right, et cetera, aquaculture and whatnot. But if I'm the first receiver, there's certain attributes that you have to share with me. And if the party is small enough that they are exempt from assigning the lot number, the first receiver in the proposed rule would have to assign the lot number. And that gave a lot of people a lot of heartache, So certainly if you look at the FDA website, there's a lot of questions about clarity around some of these owners, right? Like who owns this and what do I have to do and things like that. But I will say too, when we look internally at organizations, this data oftentimes does not sit in one system. Product data lives over here. Location data might be over here. The transactional data, POs, BOLs, et cetera, the data that's collected at the point of shipment. And then if there's an incident, right, and some of those tomatoes are moldy and I'm returning 2 boxes and then you're going to bring me 2 more, right? Think of all the different systems and the owners and the data that's going to need to be reconciled to ensure that I am collecting, if I'm receiving product, what walked through the door, right? What did I get at the lot level? And oftentimes, both in grocery and food service, that's at the case level, right?
Right.
At those other levels, DCs, third-party warehouses, et cetera, those are usually at the pallet level. But you're still going to have to tell me, is this a homogeneous pallet? Is it a mixed pallet, right? What lots, what is the FTL item and what lots are on that pallet? And I'm already starting to see some trading partners are saying, hey, put this label on that pallet that very clearly says mixed pallet, right? So that their teams know I've got to treat this pallet differently, right? The other ones I can move with ease, I can slot them, et cetera. But hey, these over here, I'm going to have to make sure that I collect both of those lots, whether there's 2 lots, 3 lots, whatever. And I've got to put that into my warehouse management system or some sort of tracking system so I know, and it's the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of those pallets are single lot, but I got a handful that are mixed. So yeah.
So one of my concerns would be, think about a restaurant that gets fresh from the farm, something on that food traceability list. And maybe that farmer doesn't necessarily, create a lot code number for where they picked it from the field and the time they did it. It's the responsibility of the restaurant at that point, if they meet the criteria, to be able to do that. And so, those are some. And then, to your point about the case, pallet with mixed pallets and stuff like that. I mean, I've talked to a number of warehouses. They will pick one lot code number, and because they're looking at, they're not looking at case level. They're looking at, they'll say, okay, this is my lot code number. We're a thing. So there has to be new thinking that goes on. And then if you do have a mixed pallet, which one are you picking from, and how do you put that up in inventory to be able to identify it?
Right. Yeah. And that's where, some of those backdoor deliveries, that's where we're going to get into some of the nuances of the rule. Is that trading partner exempt from the record keeping? And then how are you going to collect that information, for DSD items, for some of these different things, et cetera? And that could be, maybe that you have, say, a mobile app where, they can print a PTI label, they can print they can load something on their phone, scan that code, fill out a couple, fields, and submit that electronically to that grocer, to that restaurant, to say, here's what you got. So that's where, there's a lot of industry partners out there that have solutions. The FDA had the contest, right, for like low, no cost solution providers. So again, this rule, it's also bringing about quite a bit of innovation. And I think that's where we get to collaborate, right? Like you were saying, you and I were at an on-site meeting with a number of trading partners, and it was a GS1 meeting talking about FSMA 204, right? What are your challenges? How are we going to tackle this, et cetera? Solution providers have, there's all sorts of providers that have tools that can help you with whether it's product labeling, product identification, data capture, scan-based systems, right? AIDC, which is a lot of where AIM and their membership, right? A lot of the AIM members are those solution providers that provide those things. But as I said earlier, can't stress enough, this is a team effort, right? So companies are going to have to come together, not only to say, how am I going to solve for this? How do I work with all the rest of my ecosystem, right? So that I am able to capture this data. And so that when we look at standards and some of the conversations that industry is having today, they're looking at, earlier I talked about that harmonized approach from the FDA. They're looking at PTI, they're looking at GDST, they're looking at those GS1 initiatives saying, if I can identify my products and locations, if I can mark those cases and pallets so that I can collect the data through a scan or a read or something like that. And then if I can store that data, you know, whether it be in a centralized system across many systems, et cetera, I think right now is a very exciting time to be in the food industry because there's all this collaboration that's happening right now. Do you want to talk about, because Don, I know you and I have had conversations about just like, you know, we're seeing people trying different things, you know, and kind of, you know, collecting, it's not just about the data collection, it's also about the accuracy, right? It's about the efficiency and things like that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and you know, it's a great point, Julie, is that, you know, we talk about, you know, what it's going to cost to implement all this stuff to industry and to supply chain. And really it's about the ROIs on what we can get. If we understand, hey, you know what, anecdotally, 40% of our food is wasted. Okay. They take, you know, what's produced, what's put in the landfill, they figure that out. Do we really know exactly what the number is? I don't think so. But I think that, you know, there are enough issues in supply chain. So you look at warehouses in distribution, they turn over 43% of their employees every year, okay, in the food distribution. If you look at food distributors on the last mile, you know, they're turning over 36% of their drivers. If you look at over-the-road trucking, it's more like 100% of the drivers every year are turned over at a particular company. So how are you able to look at this? I mean, you have expense like the Grocery Manufacturers Association put out that the average cost of a recall is $10 million. Those are all the industry standards, okay? And if you look, you probably see a couple a day, okay, that are coming down the pike, or at least once a day, where you're seeing something come out with a potential recall. Most industry people, when you sit down and really talk to them on the food safety, this is what we need. Okay, it's scary because it's different. We're not doing what we've always done, and so we have to change. More than anything, this industry has to change, and I think that's a good part of it. Is that this will get to a good place to where we can actually save money in the supply chain.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, real quick, is that, you know, the Food Safety Modernization Act was put in place, you know, over 10 years ago. That set the foundation, right? It was the most sweeping reform of our food policies in 70 years. And the foundation of it was to collect information, right? Documents, assessments, audits, et cetera. You know, they talk about all the different foreign supplier verification, et cetera. So that was the groundwork. 204 was put on the shelf, right? It's part of FSMA. Put on the shelf, traceability. Let's get the foundation set so that, you know, we can take that next step, which is enhanced visibility of those high risk items, right? We need to collect more information, et cetera. So the groundwork was done, right, with FSMA. Now we're kind of moving into this more advanced area of change. Like you said, Don, it's going to require some changes for many companies. I do want to, because I know we're right on time, a couple things. Number one, I apologize earlier. I see there was a question, what's a kill step? So a kill step is something like if I bake something, pasteurize, et cetera, that I am, you know, minimizing those pathogens, I am killing bacteria, et cetera. And so each supplier is going to know better than Don or I or any, you know, they'll know, hey, for my different products in my supply chain, right? If I do this process, that's considered a kill step. So then, you know, they understand their role and here's what I need to track. If there's no kill step, so a good example is peanut butter crackers. Peanut butter's on the list, and I talked about the baked versus, right? Peanut butter crackers is a good example. I bake the crackers, but then I put the peanut butter on. So the peanut butter has not been through any baking or anything. It has not, its state has not changed. So those peanut butter crackers are going to have to be tracked all the way to point of, you know, that retail establishment. The peanut butter cookie, right? Again, use the peanut butter, bake it, and then the heat, et cetera, right, is considered a kill step. So that covers that. There were a couple questions real quick here about the FDA providing templates, which is a great question. We did not see any templates. We saw supply chain data examples in the proposed rule, but we did not see an actual like spreadsheet that you could fill out. And the way that the rule's written, it has all the data, it has all the roles, et cetera, but they are giving a wide berth to companies to say, here's what we need. You can do it manually or electronically. And then the FDA has a little asterisk that says, we recommend it's electronically. But they really give folks a wide berth. And I'll tell you, I was just talking with my product team the other day, and somebody who's brand new asked me that exact same question. I'm like, that's a great question. I don't have a template right now, but we do have sample data. And I anticipate, Don, don't you think, like in the final rule, they're going to build on that sample data and give us even more examples of what
you know, I really hope that they would. I know my engagements with FDA from their section on recalls was really, they get too much information. They do not want your pricing. Okay, what right. Limit thing that you can show me on the traceability scale, you know, am I going to get? That's really what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And totally agree with you, Julie. I mean, that's really, you know, part of the challenge here is Congress did not give them the authority to mandate a technology. Okay, right. A spreadsheet is a technology. You know, asterisks. I think it's a very bold asterisk from FDA is they want it in a sortable spreadsheet. You know, to be able to see.
Yep. So real quick, so I've got one more question that I want to just talk through real quick, but I do want to hit this last point, which is the final rule should be published by November 7th. We are all fingers crossed that we're gonna, you know, that we're gonna see it on or around the 7th. And to your point, Don, you know, as with any regulation, the FDA does an incredible amount of work to get that proposed rule in place. And then they get feedback from the industry, which they review, et cetera. And then they refine that rule, that final rule. So any thoughts real quick on just what companies should do as they review that content when that comes out?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely go into a dark room and take a look at that particular rule. I know Julie and I will be doing that. We'll probably spend a week somewhere and just constantly looking at that particular rule to see what the changes are, if any changes are there. You have to look at your particular role and then look at that food traceability list. And you've got to come up with, you know, am I dealing with these multiple products? And which ones are on that list? Do I do all my food this way, or do I do just these couple that are on the list itself? So really understanding, and then also I always like to bring in my my legal counsel on anything that I'm doing, especially when it's this related to this, is to make sure that, and get with a partner. Okay, get with a partner and look at how you can engage and meet compliance in this.
Yep. Yeah, great point. So real quick, because we had one last question that I'll address kind of it's specific to seafood, but really it applies to everyone, is asking about like, hey, how do we make sure that industry partners have more information, right? So they work in seafood. They already have several processes in place, which seafood, absolutely, right? There's a lot of data that you collect today. And then, you know, how will companies get notified of this? You know, communication, you know, certainly is key. And that's where with any of these regulations, et cetera, especially in food, this is where the associations are so very important, right? The Produce Association, FMI, the IFT, the Global Dialogue, et cetera. All of these parties, they're doing a whole bunch of education. That's why AIM's doing this education, right? They are pushing the message out, letting folks know like, hey, this is coming, and here's the things that you need to know about. Here's the things that you're going to need to do. The other place that you're going to hear, that you will hear from, is your trading partners, right? So you'll hear from, you know, if you're a supplier, your distributors might tell you, here's what I need. Or if you're a restaurant or a grocery store, you might be communicating to your suppliers and your distributors, on top of what you send me today, here's what I need for 204. So if I go back to that team effort idea, right? It's going to not only be the FDA communicating this, they're going to have, I'm sure they're going to have a whole set of webinars. They're going to have meetings, et cetera, that they'll record and post on their website. But it's also going to be those industry, groups, et cetera, that are getting the word out. And then, it's folks like us. I mean, solution providers, right? We're providing information to our own communities, to our own customers to help them understand, here's what we offer, or here's what you'll have to enhance or change in order to be compliant with this rule. So any last thoughts on that, Don?
Yeah, I think, once it's in the federal registry, once they're just not going to make a big announcement, in a federal registry, 60 days becomes law of the land. And our expectation is that we have 2 years to comply with this. 2 years is not very long. Okay, when you start to look at your supply chain. So you really have to get started right away is what would be the advice I would say.
Yep, you just did everything on this last slide. So perfect.
No.
So thank you so much, everyone, for participating in today's call. We appreciate your questions. And certainly, as Mary Lou, as you had said, this was recorded and this will be posted on the AIM YouTube channel with the other FSMA 204 content. So watch for that. I'm sure they'll be messaging out to the group, as well as you'll probably be posting that on social media.
Thank you so much, Jolie and Dawn. We appreciate your time today. And thank you to the audience. They've been very active with your questions. But if you have any questions or comments after this webinar, please feel free to email info@aim-na.org.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary Lou.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jolie. Thank you, Dawn.
All right.